The procurement cost of memory has gone up by a little over 375%. At the same time, we have macroeconomic changes in the world. We're currently at war in multiple different places, either participating or not participating. Price of energy is going through the roof. Welcome to CloudFest 2026. Yeah. You know, it's always a hard gig to go behind those two, right? I mean, I don't have like social media running around and all that kind of stuff, right? But I do have a few years at this place. I think this is now the 9th year I'm back. And it's sort of kind of like interesting. There was a little break in the middle. There was that thing called Corona that like took a year out of the calendar. But whenever we come to CloudFest, it seems like it's either an on year or an off year for the industry, right? And let me clarify here a little bit. If you guys, and let me take you back on a little bit of a journey for, how many of you guys have been here for multiple years? Just quick show of hands. Right. So for those of you who remember, right, it seems like every 2 years there's some like existential crisis that we have to deal with, right? 2022, we came back here right after Corona, right? We didn't have to wear the masks anymore. And then we were in the shadow of what was probably one of the biggest supply chain crunches, as well as the war in Ukraine starting. Then in 2023, we sort of kind of like got one of those years where we went to the beer party instead and just had fun. And then we came to 2024, and someone changed their licensing terms, right? That became the next sort of kind of like existential crisis. And then last year, we went to the beer fest again, which was great fun. And then this year, we're standing in front of or living in the middle of what is arguably, I've been in this industry for well over 30 years, is the most unprecedented commodity environment that I've ever seen, right? And you're not going to get many vendors that will stand up here and talk about what actual cost in the market is. But I'll just share one little factoid with you. Over the last 13 weeks, the procurement cost of memory has gone up by a little over 375%. At the same time, we have macroeconomic changes in the world. We're currently at war in multiple different places, either participating or not participating. Price of energy is going through the roof. And all of these things will collectively, once again, force us to re-examine what is the business models under which we can thrive, not survive, but thrive. And what is the value that we actually sell? How do we arrive at that? And if you think about what it is that's leading us into this fairly unprecedented or totally unprecedented commodity environment, it's the fact that AI build-out is happening. There is investments that are unbelievable in size going into the market. The big 5 hyperscalers in the United States have between them announced firm contracts for $1.2 trillion worth of AI investment in 2026. 2 of them have decided that in order to deal with the power crunch that comes with that, they've gone out and bought themselves their own nuclear reactor. These are the sort of like investments that we're up against, and yet we still have to be able to find value. And that very simplistically then boils into 2 things if you're in this part of the world. You're either going to take a infra-level conversation and continue to optimize on what does that look like, which becomes increasingly hard, or you have to basically figure out how do I deliver value that I can charge for. Now, the interesting part is that the great politicians here in Europe, and I don't say that with tongue in cheek. Most people think when I stand on a stage and I speak, they go like, here's another American. I'm actually Danish. So, trust me, I like understand the continent just as well as you guys do. The reality is that they have handed the European service provider and technology industry a gift through regulation. And that regulation is around sovereignty and the services and the demands that comes in and around sovereignty. So what I want to spend the next 15 minutes or so on, like just taking you through, is what is our view on how that value is created, how that allows you to build a business model in where you don't have to go out and compete just on the raw infra, where it's going to be tough sledding against some of these very large hyperscalers out there that are going to continue to just drive the pricing down simply because of the financial muscle they have. So if we look at what this means, it's all about sovereign cloud, which is one of the, Soren was alluding to this earlier. We spend a lot of time, along with CloudFest, leading up to these events, sitting and talking about what is it that we think as a conference that it is our educational or enlightening kind of like load that we have to put in, because we don't come here just for the beer fest. Let's be clear. Now, if we look at what sovereign is and why it's needed, it's effectively because of the macro-political situation in the world. We have to, as continents or trade blocs, basically be able to produce things ourselves, whether it's digital services, whether it's medical supplies, whether it's roads, power grids, whatever it is. And as part of that, there is and will continue to be a rising demand, not just from the consumers and the customers themselves, but also from the governments and the legislative branches of how do we actually ensure that we own and operate things ourselves so that we're resilient and that we have a sustainable way of driving our industries forward. Now, as you can see, I'm not going to read through the slides. You can do that yourself. But the data is pretty compelling. And frankly, we have reached over the last 8 to 9 months really an inflection point. The inflection point is that this has gone from a curiosity that was initially brought out by the European Union. They call it the EUCS, or the European Cloud Sovereignty Act. And that had been going back and forth in the parliament and at several government levels, but it's now becoming real. And it's becoming real to the point where this is actually a decision point. Perhaps not so much for people who just go out and buy their website to, make the casual website for their daughter's, wedding or what have you not. But moreover, when we start thinking about industry, when we start thinking about critical infrastructure, when we start thinking about those things that we actually truly care about in terms of having services and baseline services in the society. And it has been summed up in what they finally came out with, as they called it SEAL, which I thought was it's a funny little acronym. I thought it was something else when I saw it first. But the reality is that this is essentially the different levels by which services are going to be transacted. And so this means that there is a clear opportunity to move away from just infra sales and then start putting services, whether they're consultative or whether they're technology services, up on top. And this fundamentally is something that you can charge for, and you can charge for it a lot more than you can just charge for your infrastructure. Now, it's clearly rooted in the infrastructure, but the foundation of this is that this is no longer a race to the bottom of who can come up with the 10 euros a month virtual machine or a VPC or VPS. This is actually selling a product that can go into industry, whether in private clouds or whether in public spaces, that allows the purchaser to know that not only is this sovereign, it's produced in Europe, it has European technology behind it, and it's a stamp of approval that essentially is making its way into RFPs. You guys have seen that yourself, right? RFPs comes out, and instead of writing 200 pages of dreary technical detail, they'll typically refer to a standard and say, could you please just make sure that this is that standard for Europe. And this is where an enormous amount of customer revenues are going to flow to. So what's driving that? Well, it comes down to really 5 things. Competitiveness economically, and this is between trade blocs, right? United States on one side, Europe on the other side, China on a third, India, Asia Pacific, so on and so forth. It's about autonomy of technology. Being able to, as we found out during Corona, we perhaps don't make all the stuff that we need anymore. And that becomes a problem when you have big events like what happened back there. National security goes without saying, right? We have wars going on in multiple places. It's about it's about innovation as well. Because there is a lot of things that's going on, both in American technology spaces, but certainly also in European technology spaces, that are specifically catered to the economic trade bloc that they're in. And often that gets washed out by some of the hyperscalers, because they just become so big that it's like almost everything, but then when you turn and look at it, it's really not everything that you need. And then last but not least, obviously, the cultural and the linguistic kind of inclusivity, something that you guys see, especially when it comes to AI, it comes to AI models. How do they actually understand the person or the company that sits on the other end? Does it speak our language? Does it understand our heritage? Does it understand the way that our customers expect us to show up? So if we think about how that actually comes together, this is a little bit different than what we've been used to in just the simple infrastructure era. In the simple infrastructure era, you can say it sort of kind of like was the four things that were sitting in the circle. Right? We need some storage, we need some networking, we need some servers, we need some services around it, and we'll package that up and we'll be good with it. Software, as you guys saw a few years back when the licensing terms changed, is becoming increasingly important. And having a full stack inside of that space that allows you to do all the things that you as a service provider need to do. You need to be able to automate. You need to be able to run things at scale. You need to compete with internal IT departments and actually still make a good profit while beating the prices they would otherwise do internally. So there's a whole lot of things that we're asking our software stack to do, and especially as we begin to go into the AI era in where data and the gravity of data and the rights of the data and who's allowed to see it and what are you allowed to train on, what are you allowed to store, GDPR and all the other pieces that comes with it, software now becomes a very, very integral thing and not something you just bolt on afterwards. And then lastly but not least, it all needs to be secure. So if we think about what that is, this is what we in the industry term as the full stack sovereign implementation of cloud. Now, inside of HPE, we have our take on it. It starts out with all of our hardware, and there's a lot of it. I'm not going to bore you. I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of people up here over the next several days that will show you tech specs and what have you not. That's not what this is about. This is about taking a look at what does an example of such a stack look like. From HPE, it's our ProLiant servers, it's our Cray XD, XE, and our rack scale AI products. It is our Alletra storage, as well as the different software partners and software stacks that go onto that. And then our recent acquisition of Juniper, which is an extremely credible networking environment, both in the data center as well as on campus and branch. Continues to integrate all the things that you guys know around connectivity as service, using our legacy Aruba portfolio with all of our wireless products that are in there. We then took a pretty significant bet on the software. Because, yes, we heard you a couple of years ago. You were not super enthusiastic about the whole change to the software licensing portfolio. And let's face it, a lot of you guys depended on that. So alternatives are beginning to come out. You see multiple different sort of takes on it. Nutanix, for example, is here this week, right? And so many of you guys will know that as a hyperconverged appliance. They're making their inroads with NCIC and more general purpose compute that's decoupled from their traditional storage environments. But what it ultimately starts out with is actually understanding where you are. Right? Taking a survey, what do I have, and then beginning to rationalize what it is that is there for me to move today, because let's face it, the cost is not trivial. And then start to actually take a look at how do I then orchestrate and automate both the move but also the future of the setup inside of my environment. And this is not just about VMs. I mean, it could be, but in most cases, this is VMs, this is containers, this is your networking, this is your security zones, this is your data separations, this is your AI domains, et cetera, et cetera. So it's becoming a lot more diffuse than it used to be with, say, for example, VCF. then obviously, you need to be able to run this as the portfolio. I'm not here to tell you which hypervisor to use. I'm not here to tell you which Kubernetes distribution to use. As a matter of fact, I'm a strong and firm believer in open systems. HPE is one of the largest contributors into OCP, and as well as into the Linux Foundation. I have the pleasure of leading HPE in those environments. And we took a long, hard look at all the different orchestration platforms that are out there, and we finally settled on Morpheus simply because we felt that this was the most open environment in where, whether you plug in VMware, whether you plug in Microsoft, whether you plug in Nutanix, whether you plug in your own distribution, whether you, for that matter, use ours, which is unapologetically an implementation of KVM from Linux. We're not here to do closed source code, but we're here to provide you with the options of what actually meets your needs, both in terms of what a new estate would look like, but also what a hybrid estate will look like in production as you move through technology choices. Then, obviously, a lot of flavors of Linux. And then last but not least, because there's no way you can get around them, is the hyperscalers. There's going to be customers, and there are customers. I would say there's fewer customers that don't have a footprint in the hyperscalers than the people who do. And so being able to offer services and being able to offer a sovereign experience to them, which fundamentally comes down to managed services, means that you have to be able to actually also orchestrate into the large hyperscalers. So that's how all that comes together. And in our environment, it fundamentally boils down to three pieces. A way to basically orchestrate. This comes in what we call our Morpheus and VM Essentials, or a Morpheus Enterprise if you want a higher degree of integration in it. Then there's observability, which is done through OpsRamp, which goes in and takes a look at everything that happens in your environment, whether it's networking, whether it's data, whether it's the servers themselves, and pull all that together into a series of actionable environments where you can now go in and you can declare your intent. I want to optimize my VM environment. It will go out, it will collect dutifully all the logs, it will analyze it through, it will use agentic AI, build into it, and it will come out with a series of proposals of how you can actually optimize. And then last but not least, our disaster recovery and data protection environment, which is around HP Certo. And then all of that pulled together into a singular, unified cloud ops suite. What it does is that it gives you a per socket opportunity in terms of basically no more of this like memory or core or what have you not. We're pretty simple people. We're engineers at HPE, so we understand what a socket is. So that's sort of kind of like how we license this. And you know, I invite you to come over and take a look. It's not free. It's not going to be free, because there's a lot of things that goes into building this, and there's a lot of investment that goes into it. But one thing I will guarantee you is that you're going to find a much more fertile ground with HPE than you will do with many of the other alternatives that are out there. And then last but not least, this is where sort of kind of the rubber hits the road. And this is where the really big service opportunities for you guys lie as well. This is in actually taking and making this into a framework that, with the proper security, you saw that back on the slide that we said seal, incorporates all the pieces that is required in order to declare this a sovereign environment, and which will unlock for you a potential to generate revenue that is vastly increased from just selling infra. That is fundamentally what this is about. So how do I get there? Well, it's quite simple. You choose to either build it, you choose to buy it, or you choose to consume it. What does that mean? Well, I mean, if you want to build it, you know, you can put together every single combination of hardware. Our software does not care about whether it runs on HPE. If you want to run it on Dell, if you want to run it on Supermicro, if you want to run it on Lenovo, or for that matter on a white box, that works just fine. At that point, you go in, you build your own environment, and you put on the software packages from us that you want and you can add your own along the way. This is a project. This is not something you do in an afternoon. And so many of our customers come to us and say, well, there's a time to revenue in here as well. We can't spend 2 years building, and that's perfectly fine. There is the buy option. All of this comes as a preset set of T-shirt sizes. Do you want a single rack? Do you want 2 racks? Do you want 3 racks? What do you want? Do you want this much storage, this much network, blah, blah, blah. Right? You tune the recipe yourself, and it comes out of the factory. Everything's pre-installed. If you don't have the appetite for that either, then obviously you have the opportunity to go in and pull on the network of managed service providers that already has these things installed. They already have the sovereign control planes. They're not connected up to HPE's control planes. They literally are hosted by European MSPs in a fully sovereign fashion, and they will sell services out to you and capacity out to you that you can then in turn go and give to your customers. This is yet again another example of how the circular economy and service providers work. So I understand that was quite a lot. It's a lot of things to consume. There is a lot of sessions specifically on this over the next couple of days. On Tuesday, you're going to see about how this works in an AI environment. Wednesday, we're going to talk even more about AI. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk a little bit about how these trends actually come to fruition. At the same time, over in our booth, you will see all the different software stations, all the different hardware stations, and as something that we normally don't do, we brought 6 of our customers with us that are running this today. And so don't take our word for it. Go and listen to some of your contemporaries who've actually implemented this and who are running it today, and try to understand what their outcomes was. So with that said, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy CloudFest 2026.